Have you ever wanted to disappear? Well, literally take and delete all social networks, go to some other city or country in the middle of the night, cut off all contacts with friends and relatives, and just start a completely new life. Even if you yourself did not have such thoughts, then someone of your friends or acquaintances definitely had them, and this is normal. Psychology has been researching this phenomenon for a long time. Judging by the research, many people feel overwhelmed by all the delights of the modern world. We are bombarded with negative news in our feeds on a daily basis, and our constant connection to gadgets makes us feel trapped with an overwhelming desire to escape from all of this modernity. An escape to be alone, to recuperate, to heal in a way. And yes, it would be strange if this was only thought about in certain countries, but no, it is thought about everywhere. In Japan, for example, such people are called johatsu or vaporized. And in this video, I'll discuss how people usually manage to disappear without leaving the slightest trace. Why do family and police turn a blind eye? Where exactly do they disappear to? Why they decide to take this step and, of course, how they survive. I'm sure almost all of us have had at least once in our lives the desire to disappear, to go to another city or country, to start life anew, and so that no one would know where you are. Now imagine that you have done it. You have left home without leaving a single explanation to your relatives. Where would you want to go? Most likely it will be somewhere as quiet as possible, or conversely, a major city full of prospects. Well, johatsu, vaporized people, have slightly different preferences. No, not like that. They have almost no other choice but a place, which we'll talk about later. These people may be no different from normal people. They go to work, lead normal lives, but at one point they evaporate. In Japan, there is a thriving cult of shame and reputation. There is a lot of overwork, and a person's psyche may simply not be able to handle the pressure from family, management, or society. Shame for unreasonable expectations from family or employer is scarier than death to the Japanese. When feelings become unbearable, some decide to say goodbye to life, and some simply disappear without a note or explanation. The family does not go to the police, also because of shame. To avoid shame, although few people talk openly about this phenomenon, most Japanese know that there is a johatsu, and to admit that there is such a person in your family is to be humiliated in the eyes of the public. Even when approached about such cases, there is little the police can do to help. They will not intervene unless it involves a crime or accident. Unless there is evidence that a criminal case has been committed, the police are not allowed to provide relatives with either call logs or CCTV footage. People's privacy in Japan is protected at a robust level until a unified database of missing people in Japan still does not exist. Do all relatives really not care and have no desire to find their loved ones? Jehatsu, as mentioned above, is a taboo topic in Japan, but there is one family from Tokyo that has made the search for their son public despite the taboo. Their son, Naori, went missing on May 3, 2002. After saying goodbye to his parents, 24-year-old Naori warned them not to expect him for dinner. After that, the boy did not appear at home. The parents became worried for several days, only when they received a call from the Tokyo Ferry Company informing them that their son's backpack had been found on a ferry arriving at the final stop of the route. The parents' contacts were written down in Naori's paperwork, but the boy himself was nowhere to be found. The ferry staff assured that he had not put his hands on himself. They would have definitely noticed the man jumping into the water. Maybe he had gotten off a stop earlier, or maybe he had brought things onto the ferry just to confuse the tracks. The police refused to investigate the case because there were no facts to indicate that a crime had occurred. The family had no money for detectives, so the brother on the street started investigating on his own. In 7 years, he never found anything. Naori's parents wrote letters asking the mayor of Tokyo and even the Prime Minister of Japan to be more proactive in dealing with the problem of missing persons. They launched campaigns demanding that the authorities spend more time distributing flyers and missing persons reports. Several times, the missing boy's family was invited to appear on television programs, but they never heard from their son. His mom also said that most people who search for their loved ones do so in secret. Among the vaporized, such practice with confusing traces is more common. French journalist Lena Mauger learned about this phenomenon in 2008 and devoted 5 years of her life to studying this topic. She wrote a book which contains the stories of various people she managed to find. At first, many people refused to answer her, saying that there was no such thing in their country, that johatsu was just a legend. At first, she couldn't even get a translator. When the Japanese translators found out what topic was to be dealt with, they politely refused to cooperate. But in the end, there was a man who agreed to help her in her investigation. He was a 50-year-old expert on the subject. He acted as a translator. He also was able to find a public company that assists in locating missing persons. Also, in addition to such services, Japan has what are called night carriers. These are companies that help people to escape and cover their tracks, or alternatively, organize a mayhem in a house by staging a robbery. Since there is nothing illegal about johatsu from the point of view of Japanese law, a whole industry of thousands of companies that help people vaporize has formed. Some even have their own websites. All Hattori, the owner of one such company, explained how he came to this business. Initially, he had a regular moving company that helped people with moving. But one day, he was approached in a bar by a strange woman who asked him to help her vaporize. Her husband was mired in debt, and she was afraid he would ruin her life too. Hattori agreed. The man then placed an ad for his company's help in Japan, called Overnight Moves. Potential customers quickly figured out what was involved, and soon he could barely process orders. He charged 400,000 yen for overnight moves, 3 times as much as a normal move. Hattori later wrote a book about it. He admitted that he did not consider people who chose to disappear to be cowards. On the contrary, he believed that he had helped them find their way to a better life. Because he was born and raised in Japan, Hattori was able to fully experience the cult of shame, submission, and reputation prevalent there. So he understands the motives and feeling of the people who decided to take this step. Johatsu is the extreme degree of despair when one sees no other option but to escape. The journalist spoke with another owner of a similar company, Mihu Said. She, like Hattori, believes in helping people. She herself once ran away from her past, which left her with a scar on her cheek. Said recounts, "Back then, there were no laws protecting victims of domestic violence yet. The police could only ask the abuser to stop. I took the dog, got in the car, and disappeared." The disappearances themselves, which are organized by these companies, take place under the cover of night. Often, the employees who help them disappear pretend to be movers or repair crews. As darkness falls, they drive up to the customer's house in an unmarked truck, shade the windows in the room, a person, and help to quickly pack and load all the things. After just a couple hours, the person is gone. The company helps people to settle down in a new place. They do everything to make it impossible to find them. But if the person himself decides to return to his former life, no one will stop him. These companies only fulfill their duties. A person, if he wants, may well return, although it is extremely rare to return to their relatives. Depending on the complexity and circumstances, the cost of such services can be from several hundred to several tens of thousands of dollars. Those Japanese who do not have enough money for these kinds of services have to disappear on their own. Using published manuals, one of them called The Complete Guide to Disappearance, labeled Refuse Your Sad Pathetic Reality, is quite empowering. What pushes people to become johatsu? The reasons can be many and varied. There are people who don't want to go through all that bureaucratic hell, signing a bunch of papers. So it's easier to disappear than to formalize a divorce. Someone loses a large sum of money in slot machines. Some even leave their small children to their spouse. Some are fleeing domestic violence, which used to be overlooked by the police. Some are linked to a religious sect, thus deciding to cut ties and free themselves. There have been cases of young people vaporizing because they failed exams, as they couldn't bear the shame and embarrassment that fell on their shoulders. The largest number of vaporized appears in times of global financial crises. People get into debt to somehow feed themselves and their families. Annual interest on microloans could exceed 100% for those who did not repay. Some loan companies of this kind even belonged to, so there was even a popular term for it, money from the honeycomb. So where do the Japanese go? It is true that some Japanese have managed to start a better life after vaporization, but this is rather an exception. There are not many wealthy people among the johatsu who have enough money for a beautiful new life. The vast majority settle in the Sanya neighborhood. It's often referred to as the ghetto that doesn't exist. This area of Japan can't be found on any official map, and legally, it doesn't exist at all. Tokyo, the capital of Japan, is one of the most technologically advanced cities in the world. Here, among the beautiful modern skyscrapers, streets with neon signs and traditional temples, there is a ghetto neighborhood called Sanya. Virtually the entire neighborhood consists of a vast slum. Here, people have to live in tiny, dirty hotel rooms, where there is usually no internet. And many of the facilities necessary for a comfortable existence are not available. In some of these lodging houses, tenants are forbidden to speak in full voice after 6 in the evening. Many who have escaped to this neighborhood are immigrants. Although they remain citizens of their country, they take any hard, low-paying job. Oh, and to top it all off, the neighborhood is only truly controlled by the local Japanese mafia, the infamous Yakuza. There are those among the johatsu who exist in similar conditions, adjoining them. The Sanya neighborhood is becoming a new home for the johatsu. The likelihood of someone coming here and looking for them is negligible. Yes, perhaps few relatives will come here looking for a missing person, but there are people among tourists or foreign journalists. Because of its sad fame, the Sanya neighborhood enjoys some popularity. Here are some stories of people who have been journalists in the area, each they met in person to record their stories. 50-year-old Nurihiru arranged his disappearance 10 years ago. Back then, he was working as an engineer and had a wife and son. But when he was fired, he didn't dare to tell his family about it. Instead, every day, for a week, he put on a suit in the morning, leather shoes, took his briefcase, and left the house, pretending to go to work as usual. On payday, Nurihiru says, he shaved neatly, said goodbye to his wife, and got on the subway and vanished. Never again did he return to that neighborhood or see his family. It hurts me to think about my parents looking for me. I hope they're doing well. Maybe they still believe I'll come back, or maybe they're already dead, ponders the aging man 10 years later, who now does hard, low-paying labor. And he doesn't mention his wife and son. But Rihiru lives in a dilapidated hotel for laborers in an empty, windowless room. And on the Izrai tatami floor, 20-year-old Masao has not returned home. After prison, he says he didn't want his parents to be ashamed of him and went to live on his own. He was convinced it was better to let his relatives not look for him. Better to let them think he was dead. Married, the martial artist optimistically saw the very future together with his wife Tamok. They lived in their own house in Saitama, an upscale suburb of Tokyo. It was here that their firstborn son Tim was born. The family took out a loan to open a dumpling shop, but there was a default and the family business went bust. The couple did what thousands of their countrymen do in similar circumstances. They sold their house, packed up their belongings, and disappeared forever. Agree, a strange state of existence outside of civilization in one of the most developed cities in the world. But lately, the neighborhood has started to improve a bit. A lot of cheap hotels started to appear. The area is being recognized by more and more people every day, including you, and it's a chance to capitalize on the tourist boom. But is life becoming easier for the disappeared themselves? That's a rhetorical question. Thank you very much for watching. You can support the channel by clicking the link in the video description.